Hi everyone. In this video, I'd like to talk about narcissistic supply. What is it? What function does it serve? And why do narcissists need this to function? Some of you may have heard the term narcissistic supply before. We can think of it like a hole in them that they need to fill all the time with something. Or to use an analogy by James Masterson, who is a psychiatrist who is a specialist in narcissistic personality disorder, he uses the analogy of a leaky balloon. So it's a balloon that's leaking all the time and it needs to be constantly inflated. Why do narcissists abuse others? Narcissistic supply. So narcissistic supply is the name for the driving force behind the behaviours of a narcissist. This driving force is their shaky, unstable self-esteem, of which they are largely consciously unaware. This is because it is well defended against by their ego/consciousness and suppressed into their subconscious. The narcissist has an inflated false self. This can be compared to a leaky balloon which needs to be constantly inflated with narcissistic supply. This supply consists of others admiring the narcissist or mirroring back to them the false self which they present. Narcissistic personality disorder is thought to be established by around the age of 3, and it's a personality disorder. So the personality and the way of thinking is disordered. So it doesn't function like a healthy person's functions. And it involves the creation of this grandiose false self, which is an image that doesn't live in reality, that they believe in. They need to feed this image all the time. So when we're talking about mirroring there, we're talking about they want to see that false image of themselves in your eyes. So you're admiring of them, you're idealizing them. And if you don't, then this will trigger in them a response to that, which can be a narcissistic rage or silent treatment or a devaluing where they're being very critical. Narcissists like to feel powerful over others, have control over others, get attention, praise and admiration, and elicit negative or positive emotional energy. Sometimes it can be the negative energy that they might be trying to draw from you, and this can be attention to them still so that they're not feeling ignored. And this can give them a sense of power as well. This can feed into their beliefs about you. Let's say, for example, that you're a scapegoat child of theirs or you're a partner of theirs who they put down a lot and they criticize a lot. If you respond to their behavior, their criticism, their silent treatments, their rage with any kind of anger or emotional response to them, then often this can be used against you to confirm their bias, to confirm their way of thinking, which is, oh, look, you are a bad person because look how angry you are. For some of them, the more toxic, sadistic ones, enjoying that element of having control over you and power over you. Supplies are activities and relationships which fuel and reinforce the grandiosity of the narcissist. So some people talk about primary and secondary sources of supply. So primary source of supply is going to be people closest to them, so their children or their partner. Secondary sources of supply are going to be other family members, perhaps, other close relationships they might have on the side from their partner. Yeah, people in their environment in general that they're not so close to, that they will get those supplies from. So the thing is about the grandiose image that they present to themselves and to other people is that it's all based on a fantasy. And the purpose is to reinforce the grandiosity in order not to feel depressed. So if this leaky balloon doesn't keep being inflated, then there's a depression at the end of it. The false self of the narcissist views itself as perfect and therefore is entitled to whatever it wants without having to work or struggle. If mirroring from the environment, so this means people around them reflecting back to them their grandiose fantasy of themselves, is inadequate, then the false grandiose self will feel frustrated and then the underlying anger and depression will start to emerge. Let's say the environment is challenging that grandiose view of themselves, then especially a scapegoat child, so a golden child, probably be reinforcing this image to the narcissist, that idealizing and admiring. A scapegoat child might be more likely to be challenging, and then this threatens that grandiose false image, doesn't it? So then they need to push back really strongly to just shut down at any cost what's happening in the environment that's challenging them, so they can move back into that space of living in their grandiose self, believing in that grandiose self. Rage is a way that they do it. Silent treatment is another way they do it. So they'll literally just shut off your existence in their mind and won't speak to you. And this can sometimes last for hours, sometimes last for days, sometimes last for weeks. Each person with narcissistic personality disorder is going to be different in the way that they function, but silent treatment can go on for weeks. And then also when they're critical, if they're criticizing their partner or their child, then this is going to be very destructive to that person's self-esteem and self-worth. So this is another way of taking down people close to you so that that grandiose false self isn't challenged. So it makes logical sense when we look at it like that. And what's really helpful in dealing with a narcissist is understanding where the behaviours come from and why they're there. This doesn't excuse them. They still do need to take personal responsibility for themselves, but narcissists in general tend to lack self-awareness. And the self-aware ones, they tend to go into therapy for depression and anxiety. And then if that person that they're dealing with, the psychologist or the counsellor, knows about narcissistic personality disorder, they might be able to tell the person that's what might be going on for them. And then my understanding is that's how most self-aware narcissists get to be self-aware. But many narcissists aren't going to arrive at that conclusion themselves, because we can see it as a defense mechanism of steel. It's very solid and very hard to break through. There are very few moments where a narcissist might break down and cry, for example. There's an interesting video actually by Borderline Notes, I think it's called. I'll put a link in the description. They have a doctor on there speaking, and she's called Diana Diamond. And she talks about how there's been a study done where they found that people with narcissistic personality disorder can be suicidal, and they tend to be more successful in their suicide attempts. So this shows us that when that abandonment depression comes up, it can be so overwhelming that it can lead to a successful suicide. And then another thing that we know about narcissists is that if they've been in therapy for a long time, then they can begin to change. According to Diana Diamond, changes start around a year, but really you're looking at 5 to 10 years is my understanding. And James Masterson says it's a period of 5 to 10 years, if I remember correctly. So this proves to us that it is a defense that can be overcome with a lot of time. And that also shows us how solid that defense is as well, that it takes such a long time to change that and for them to develop healthier defenses. But then we could think of, are their defenses healthy for them? So at root, do they actually want to keep everyone away from them? Because that fear of being close to people is so strong. So it's a way of avoiding people. It's a way of keeping people at a distance. It's a way of keeping people under control. It's feeding this false, grandiose image. Because if we look at the strength of their defenses, then we can see that the thing they're trying to protect themselves from feeling, they feel warrants that level of response to the people around them and the environment. So I'm not making excuses for them here. I'm thinking that the best way to deal with this is to have a realistic picture of what's happening. We can have empathy with what a narcissist is struggling with, but it can be empathy at a distance, and it can certainly be an empathy which doesn't involve us being hurt by them or to use us to fill that leaky balloon in them or that hole in them. And then how we can do that, how we can defend ourselves from a narcissist, is by having our own boundaries. So boundaries are really important, and that's another video because that's another big subject in itself. So I hope this video was interesting and there was some interesting information in there that you didn't know before. And take care. Bye.